Each speaker will give around 15 minutes introductions, and Professor Hopkins will give a talk on the rethinking climate change education. The second speaker will be given by Professor Eric Clark, on the climate change and the social policy. And the third talk will be given by the Professor Lam Xiaobei, and the title of his talk will be the models and narratives and actions, cognitive and effective factors in individual and collective behavior. Because the Professor Hopkins asked for the full 15 minutes time slot, so without further ado, let's welcome the Professor Hopkins.
Thank you very much. With the 15 minutes and when we spent a lot of time in the introduction and so on, although it is nice, I would rather spend the time talking with you. This morning we want to talk about things in regards to research. And so in the talk I will come in and out and talking about this. Yeah. So one of the first issues that we have was with climate change education in higher education. The discussions that have been had, first of all, whether to keep climate change education as a separate thing or to embed it in education for sustainable development. Yesterday, I showed you a slide with 100 different kinds, including Ian, permaculture education, right, was what we were trying to think of last time. So they said it will get lost there. Then the Danish government wanted climate change education to replace ESD. And the rest of the governments of the UN said, no, there are other huge issues as well as climate change. So this is the first premise, is that we embed this and refer to the essay, climate change education for sustainable development. It's sort of the topic. It's awkward, but it's there. Then the big thing that we have to come to grips with within your own institution is, are we talking about climate change as an interesting thing for research? Or are we actually trying to do something about it? And if we are trying to do something about it, that's a whole different approach, including the research. But that is something your institution will have to address. Now, there are many possible approaches to this. For instance, the first one of many universities is simply to ignore it and continue on with their ship sailing the same course as they have always done. Now, at Bonn, where I chaired a meeting of 30 ministers of education from around the world, and they said this is not an option. Addressing sustainability is an obligation, especially for higher education when we are funding it. Somehow we have to work it out in a context of academic freedom. It could be that your approach is to criticize the whole concept of sustainable development, and that is an important component of education for sustainable development. Otherwise, we will never evolve to a higher level and better and clearer thinking. That's sort of where we are today. So you can either do that, you can form a special interest group, and there's a whole group down here, greening the university campus, I hope. That Harold will deal more with that. And of course the new thing is, yes, it's nice for the university to save money on water and waste management. Any university that's not already greening the campus should not be allowed to grant a university degree. They're not thinking, right? So if you're wasting that kind of money. But the big thing is, how do we green the mind? And green is not a good term when we think of sustainability. It is beyond that. And then, of course, you can keep on going down where you can build research institutes, engaging ESD, and climate change across all the disciplines. I was pleading yesterday for the social sciences and so on. So there's a whole smorgasbord of things that you could do. And then when you come up with a matrix, this is for mitigation that I was talking about, and this one is for adaptation. And of course in the middle you have a whole group of things that do both. But you can be looking at these, and each one of these are just beginning new areas, or most of them are beginning, and they need research. We need to know how to do this, how to do it well. We have many people of good heart who are doing projects, but we don't really know and understand how efficiently they are doing it. I'm just going to move on. You'll have this in the slides to go back and look at. But with that whole grouping of things to do, you know, for them to work well, they need to be assembled. We need some leadership. We need to think, what are we going to do? Because otherwise, you just have a whole group of parts, and you're not going to get very far. Now, University of British Columbia is the one that I'd like to pick on a bit here. In Canada, they're the ones that I've seen have probably gone the furthest in moving. They already are carbon neutral, and now they're working on being carbon neutral, including student transportation. And that is huge. They're a university of about 50,000. So to try and include the student transportation in your CO2 budget is huge. But they are leaders, I think, in greening the mind. Now, for instance, there's every student that goes through is exposed to education for sustainable development. And sustainability is a core component. It's like what they are doing in Sweden, where the government says that all universities must address sustainable development. And so the idea of holistic systems thinking is one component. These are the four big attributes or areas that all students need to address. Now, in the holistic, and they have different ways of doing it. One way of going through is by really going into depth with a particular discipline and then seeing how your discipline, whether it's medicine or biology or engineering, what are the factors of sustainability that affect your particular discipline? And, or you can take a cross-cutting theme such as water or energy or racism. It could be social issues, it could be economic issues, and you look at it in a cross-disciplinary kind of thing. But it means that they have a whole team of people that are really thinking about that. Now, in the holistic thinking, for each of these, if you can find them on the web very easily, and it's really written up nicely for holistic thinking. There's a lot of thought that goes behind it. But where I'm thinking for you I would love to see more work done from an Eastern perspective, an Eastern worldview. Because much of the work around sustainability is from a very Western thing. How do we commoditize? How do we put a price on things? How do we save things through production and consumption and so on? And so the idea of the four respects, I think, is something that we could look at. In China, the respect for present and future generations and respect for difference and diversity. Throughout Asia, there's sort of a general four respects: respect for nature, respect for culture, respect of others, and respect of self. As a foundation for an education system and an evaluation system for education, that would be a very different kind of approach. And I think that there would be some real use in research in that. It would be a wonderful contribution, because so many now of the Asian academic leaders have got their PhDs in the West. And so before we lose some of this, For instance, I was recently in Mongolia, and in this valley where Genghis Khan came from, there is a huge mining operation, Canadian gold mining, Australian coal mining. Now, they have had people living there for 6,000 years in that valley, the archaeologists say, who have been able to live in harmony with nature for 6,000 years. Now, this Mongolian shepherd, very educated man, very smart man, he's saying, these gold mines and coal mines are run by people with PhDs. But they are threatening the whole future of civilization in the valley. What kind of an education do they have? You know, they must have a very good one if they're in charge of a gold mining company. Anyway. Another component then regarding the holistic thinking is this one about sustainability knowledge. And once again, they come up with the different models and paradigms, and in fact, having people develop their own personal definition and construct of what it is that they're going to be doing. But we also know that knowledge alone does not lead to behavior change. Right? Otherwise, there would be no smoking, no drinking and driving, and teenagers would all put their clothes away. You know, you should hang up your clothes. Oh, all right, and do it. This chart shows that as time goes on with climate change, people in the United States, fewer and fewer people believe that it actually is happening. Even though they are given more and more information, they do not want to believe it. The implications of having to change one's lifestyle. So there's much more to it than simple knowledge or simple awareness. And building the awareness and integrating it into other things that we do. So the research into learning perspectives. How does education change from the traditional of learning as acquisition to one of participation, then finally the student themselves in action and going out? So in this one we have climate change is seen as, it's a British scientific term, wickedness, where we don't understand what is causing it, how does it happen, and so on in the way of science. So here's down with low uncertainty and low wickedness. This is where universities and especially public school, elementary, secondary, they love to be down here, where it's very safe. But where students really want to be is out in these areas where you're dealing with these kinds of issues. They're uncertain, there's no right or wrong. How do you mark these essays? How do you even think about it? So it's shifting into that. And then the idea that knowledge is not enough, UBC wants everyone to be actors. I love this one because when we think of acting, we think of campaigns, holding special days. Sometimes though, I'd love to see research into the role of the arts in bringing about change. And so we were talking a lot about the melting of the ice in the high Arctic. Ellesmere Island is about as far north in Canada as you can go in the high Arctic. And so this is an artist talking about with climate change, we'll have new beaches. This is fantastic. Or this one, where in their condominium and the hot sun blazing in, and the solution is to just lie there in front of your refrigerator with a fan blowing on you. But of course, as a physics scientist, you would probably realize for every unit of cold coming out, how many units of heat are going out the back of the refrigerator, etc. So there's much that can be done there. And then lastly, the responsibility. All students who graduate are given the option, and pretty well every student takes, thank you so much, the sustainability pledge, where the students stand up. This is their own unique one. Many universities now are developing a sustainability pledge, where the students say, I will not use anything I've learned in higher education to hurt the environment or to hurt other people. It's like, pretty much like a doctor. So I thank you very much for your attention, and I think I've made it. And I also want to thank you for the work that those of you who are professors here are already doing, and thank you in advance to the next generation, because I know that you will be the one saving me. Thank you so much.
So this continues to the second talk given by the Professor Clark. Okay, 15 minutes on climate change and social policies. I do feel that there's honestly not, I mean, in a way, most of what we talked about yesterday, it depends on what's going on in your mind a bit, but for me, it's all about social policy. Simply because if you start by thinking that you're not going to solve this with geoengineering or something, and that it's enmeshed with social issues, then of course any talk about sustainability will have that quality. Anyway, I have a few thoughts on it, and I revisited my brief abstract and realized what at least I thought I was thinking that I might want to say. And 3 points: the role of social policies in seeking sustainability pathways in climate change mitigation and adaptation. Social problems in climate change sustainability are enmeshed, and look at an example of a research effort, a big 10-year research program in Sweden, and a brief look at eco-branding in Copenhagen, Malmö, to problematize, I guess, some of what's going on with being sort of like the watchdog with what was mentioned earlier about that it's important that we have critical perspectives in order to raise our level of quality of our thinking and research and thought. Anyway, I want to start off with social policy is very much about issues like equality, which I made some point of yesterday. And I want to draw attention to one of my favorite researchers that I use a whole lot when I teach, has quite many books out, is Richard Wilkinson, who's an epidemiologist. And here's an article from the British Medical Journal where he argues that equalities, that action on climate change is hampered by the view that reducing carbon emissions will involve sacrifice in living standards. But the researchers here argue that greater equality will not only help achieve sustainability, but also enhance the real quality of life. And Richard Wilkinson has, in his books, very many graphs, and almost all of them have the same figure, same shape, so that you have income inequality on one axis and some other variable on the other. And almost in a way you can say that it's okay, it's just a correlation, and so these don't pick apart the causal forces involved, but they do raise some interesting questions and they point in certain directions. And here's environmental compliance scores, just as an example, and low or high inequality. And it seems that the more unequal a society is, the less companies feel obliged to comply with environmental regulation. He has very many other figures, and I don't have time to go into it. One of my favorites, because I think in any social issue at all, trust is very, very basic. Because it's on trust that we build
solid politics and we move forward in constructive ways. There's always going to be conflicts of ideas and interest in politics, but trust is very basic in very many parts and spheres of social life. So it's so very, very basic. Now, how do you measure it? There are lots of different ways, but these are two figures, countries and states in the U.S. that suggest that the more unequal a society, the less trust there is, and all the consequences that has because that trust is so fundamental. Anyway, enough about Richard Wilkinson. If you're not familiar with his work, I can suggest looking at it because among the many issues that he relates to inequality, sustainability, and climate change are also there. Now, this thing with social problems and climate change being enmeshed. I'm part of a 10-year research program called LUCID. It's one of the acronyms that we live with these days, millions and upon millions. And in this case, I'm almost thankful to have the acronym because the name of it is the Lund University Center of Excellence for the Integration of Social and Natural Dimensions of Sustainability. And so the acronym is 3M. But what you have here is old social problems that we've been struggling with for millennia and never seem to go away entirely, but in some societies, especially equal societies, we seem to do better at dealing with them. And then we have sustainability challenges. Now, if you ask me, this is just a parenthesis. I don't buy into that all these challenges are new. I mentioned yesterday that in the long stretch of our history, we've been struggling with climate change before. We have. So, I mean, somewhere there's which gives cause for some optimism. And I really don't think any of these so-called new challenges are actually new to our history. But we see them as new because they seem to be especially sort of urgent now, and so that's fine. We can call them new. Anyway, they are very much enmeshed, and so for me it just seems strikingly obvious, and I think it came out from yesterday's discussion too, that any sort of effective approach to mitigation and adaptation to climate change has to deal with something that you could broadly call social policies and certainly education. This is sort of like the basic idea. This is how we got the huge pot of money to do this 10-year research. It seemed convincing in terms of finances. This is a research structure centered around three themes of scientific understanding, sustainability goals, and pathways to sustainability. Then we had this thing, there was much talk yesterday about problem solving is so important, but, and it is, but we need to sort of like cross this also with critical research because when you're solving problems, there's nothing quite so useful as a good theory. And theory, as was pointed out by Professor Arquez, needs critical engagement in order to refine itself and become more accurate, a better metaphor for our interventions into the world. Now, when I revisited this article that was basically written when Lucid was taking off and trying to present ourselves to the international community, it struck me just how much social theory is in here, and yet it's supposed to address environmental issues. And I was happy to see that. So, for instance, we have, when it comes to scientific understandings, it's not only sort of like geoscience, as I mentioned, we do have physical geographers on the team, but very much this kind of world system dynamics, unequal exchange, material flow analysis, which isn't very physical, but it has very much to do with social relations. Sustainability goals. Society formulates and negotiates social goals for one or multiple challenges in political dialogue. And then this thing with justice and fairness, which seems so basic. And the third point, eco-branding, which is, I guess my approach to this in this book chapter that is included there, that you can look more closely at, is an effort to problematize the tendency towards the empty signifier, that you can, and the co-optation of sustainability in an effort to make money out of it rather than actually work with it. It's a tricky line of business because I sometimes see in colleagues and others that you can go overboard with this because it tends to become sort of less constructive. So at the same time that I'm going to present a critique of the eco-branding of Copenhagen and Malmö, I don't with that necessarily mean that nothing has been that we can sort of like I don't mean that we should not acknowledge all the fabulous work that's been done in these two cities that actually have helped to improve the environment there. But I am going to problematize just how green these cities are because of material flows. And I'm going to ask, what is carbon neutral? What is carbon neutral? But this is in a forthcoming book. Copenhagen and Malmö have been very successful in eco-branding themselves in this international competition and to become a greener city. And one of the things that it appears that cities are using greenness and sustainability to attract capital and to attract the right people, the creative class. And this is what cities have been doing before we were all clamoring to become the greenest and the most sustainable. Then, there were other things that we were competing with, but we were still trying to attract capital and the right people. So in a way, this isn't very much different from what we've been doing earlier. And at the same time, again, we can't deny that the city's environments for everyday living have definitely improved. Malmö, here's some pictures from the Shanghai Expo 2010. And again, these cities go around the world fairs and present themselves in green. And so it's no surprise, perhaps, that when these organizations that rank cities, it's no surprise that they come very high in these rankings because this is a big project for them. Very much has been on sort of like getting there. So this is very much was made out of Västerhamnen, which is a new sort of waterfront regeneration project in Malmö. There's an electrical bike you can see right over here that you can recharge your cell phone with, and there's a film corner, and there's a city model. And the city model here very much was made out of Västerhamnen, which was this waterfront redevelopment. And being China, of course, you could stamp a little booklet, and there was a long queue to the signing, getting the stamp, and the slogan was making sustainability reality. And as is argued in the book chapter, and I can't take the time to go into detail, but most of what makes Copenhagen and Malmö green today took place before they hatched the idea of marketing themselves and branding themselves as green, because it happened through post-industrialization and processes that were done through the welfare state decades ago. And so, yes, they're clean, relatively clean cities, but it seems precious little to do with the eco-branding that's going on, which seems to be more successful and more geared to attracting the right people and capital than it is to actually sort of, but anyway. So I have no idea how many minutes I've spoken, how much time I have left, but so what I want to ask is, well, what about material flows and ecologically unequal exchange? And, you know, what do we mean by carbon neutral? All sorts of cities go and say, well, we're going to be carbon